Mahatma Gandhi said, "Each night when I go to sleep, I die. And every morning when I awaken, I am reborn." So there I was, being happily reborn on January the 27th, 2012, and it was a day that started like many other days. I had breakfast with my wife and family, I drove my sons to school, I went to the gym and had a workout with my trainer, and I distinctly remember about 11:30 that day having the thought, this is a blessed day. And then the day started to take a downward turn with increasing velocity, such that in the evening I was in urgent care, and the next morning I was flat on my back awaiting surgery at a hospital in Denver. It was the first surgery I'd had since I was 6 years old, and I'd had my tonsils removed in Yorkshire, England, where I was born. Two things seem to have changed about surgery in the intervening years. Number one, surgery appears to have got a lot more expensive. And two, surgery now seems to be accompanied by a sense of mortality. Or maybe it was just the words of the anaesthetist who came out to join me just before I went into the surgery. Her conversation was about her role in the forthcoming operation, which of course was to make me unconscious during it, but also to deliver on behalf of the hospital some sort of legal disclaimer, because she said to me, "David, everything is going to be okay. There will be no problems. But I am also obliged to tell you that sometimes people don't come back." Words have an impact, yes? But I knew that. Many, many, many years ago, I got my degree in English language and literature from Oxford University. I studied with some of the finest minds on the planet about how language is formed and how it can be expressed in literature. I could bore you to death in the room today talking about the etymology of the word etymology. That's a linguist joke. How was it for you? And then I left university and the world of academia, and I set up a theatre company with my friend Alan. We toured the world, making people laugh, making people cry with the words of Shakespeare and Rabelais and Jonathan Swift. And for the last 20 years, I've made a career in organizational development consulting and coaching, which exists nowhere else except in and through language. So I knew that words have an impact. But there is more to it than that. And that more to it is what this talk is about. The more to it is what I have now devoted my life to. And the more to it is this, that words can and do have an impact on us, but we can use our words to create our lives. We can use our language to change our world. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. Some days after that surgery, I was lying on my sofa at home recuperating, and I was watching Turner Classic Movies, and on came The Miracle Worker, one of the great underrated movies of all time, and a movie with the most amazing emotional climax. The climax of the movie is when Helen Keller finally connects the finger movements that her teacher in sign language has been making on her hand with the experience of water being drawn on her other hand from a faucet. In that moment, Helen Keller gets water. Many years later, she was to write about exactly that moment in these words. Then, suddenly, I knew not how or where or when, my brain felt the impact of another mind, and I awoke to language, to knowledge of love, to the usual concepts of nature, of good and evil. I was actually lifted, she writes, from nothingness to human life. In that moment, before language, nothing, or at best, nameless sensations on the palm of a hand. After language, lights on, meaning, connection, the thirst for growth. She became the first deafblind person ever to get a degree. In that moment, Helen Keller moved from being a passenger in her life to being a creator of it. And this talk is about how we can all get our own rebirths into a fully more intentional life by getting a new access to the power of language, of words. Because in the beginning, there is a word. But what has language got to do with sustainability? What has words got to do with sustainability? Let me answer that question in two ways. Way number one, somebody give me sustainability. You can't. Because sustainability is a concept, an idea expressed in language. Sustainability doesn't exist out there. You and I cannot walk down the corridor and trip over sustainability. It isn't going to happen. Sustainability doesn't exist out there. Sustainability exists in here, and in there, and in there, and in there, and so on and so on and so on and so on, and of course in our mutual speaking of it. So if we are going to get good at growing greener generations, then we are going to have to get very good at having effective conversations about what sustainability actually is and what each of us are supposed to do about it. The second answer to the question, what has sustainability got to do with language, is this. Sustainability, as we know, is about change. And as I was telling you in my organizational development consulting career, I know that change happens in the talking about it. All those macho leaders striding around their organizations demanding more action haven't got that the action they are looking for is birthed in language. Show me a powerful result in your organization or institution, and I will trace it back to a powerful conversation that catalyzed that action. Show me a weak result in your organization or institute or life, and I will trace it back to weak language, weak conversations, weak words. And there's something else that I know about change. Whether we want to change the world, or whether we want to change the government, or whether we want to change the corporate culture, whatever the scale of the change is that we are contemplating, change, human change, because sustainability is human change, sustainability, human change always happens at a personal level. Change happens in units of one. I may want to change the world, but I want to be sure that I can change my own world first. I may want the world to be the greatest expression of itself it can be, but I want to make sure that my life can be like that too. That's what I call personal sustainability. And personal sustainability isn't just about the sorts of things we've been talking about today. Recycling, getting a greener car, being more energy efficient. So personal sustainability for me is around this definition. Not the second one, which we are very used to talking about in conferences like this, but the first one. How well am I and you able to express our lives in language? How well are we able to line up our lives with what we say matters in our lives? Because if we cannot work our own lives like that, who's going to listen to us when we talk about changing the world? All of that happens in speaking. My life, like yours and Helen Keller's, gets born in language. The more intentional the speaking, the more intentional the life. So, the idea I'd like us to get our heads around today is that words are all we have. And if you come up to me later in the bar and say, David, you've missed something off the list, you are going to have to use words to explain that to me. So I've got you. But words are all we have. Maybe that's why we feel compelled to say so many of them every day. Apparently today, before I go to sleep, I will have spoken roughly 16,000 words, and so will you. And then tomorrow we will get up and we will say 16,000 words each again. Women apparently will say a few hundred words more than the men, but I don't want to get into that now. It's just what the research says, it's not my opinion. And all of those 16,000 words every day add up to roughly 370 million words you and I will speak in our lifetime. Maybe we should go on a speaking diet. And at the end of this talk, I'm going to invite you to consider going on a speaking diet with me. 370 million words. How many of those words are going to make a difference? How will we know which ones? To answer that question, I think we need to understand this distinction. We need to understand that there are words which are very, very, very good at describing this thing that we call our reality, our experience. There are words which are perfect for sharing ideas, justifying points of view, explaining, discussing, etc., etc., etc. And we have to remember that we can explain things to each other all day and not produce any change at all. Change happens when we get into the left-hand column of my slide here, into what I call the language of creation. Let me give you a very, very simple example. So suppose I'm having a party on Saturday night. I could describe the party to you, how great it's going to be, the great food we're going to have, and the entertainment that we're going to have. But until I actually invite you to the party, nothing has happened yet. There has been no cause for anybody to take any action. Either you to rearrange your schedule to be at the party, or me to get my house ready and get some beer in. Only when we shift into the left-hand column do we make things happen. And there is a perfect example, a bigger example of that in this room right here, right now. TEDxCSU was born out of the left-hand column. Hannah and Brooke, who you met, thank you, yes. Hannah and Brooke, who you met earlier, are part of an incredibly talented, incredibly committed team of people, and an incredibly tired team of people at the moment, who have got this thing to work and things to happen. But the inspiration of it came out of a declaration. Hannah and Brooke went to TED Mile High, and they were so inspired by that event that at the end of it, Hannah said, "There will be a TED event in Fort Collins in 2012, and here we are." When we stand and make declarations like that, we shift the future and we galvanize people around us to help us create that future. JF Kennedy, of course, is most famous for making a declaration in the 60s when he said that we will put a man on the moon and we will bring him back, when nobody in the room there knew what he was talking about, whether that was possible. My party, putting a man on the moon, TEDxCSU, all things born out of the left-hand column. So my invitation for you is to think about stepping into the left-hand column, because I think you will find three things happening in your life. Number one, your experience of yourself will change. You will begin to experience yourself more as somebody who is beginning things, starting things, inviting people into crazy projects which come alive like this. Second, other people's experience of you will change. You will begin to show up in their lives as somebody with a fire in the belly and a glint in the eye. And thirdly, your experience of the world will change. 4 weeks ago, I met with Hannah and I was asking her what it was like to organize a conference like this. She said, "Oh, we've had many roadblocks along the way." I said, "Where are the roadblocks now, by the way?" She said, "Most of them are behind us." That's what happens to roadblocks, to problems, when we live more in the left-hand column than the right. Whereas I'm sure you'll have had experiences, and I have in my life too, where we drift over into the right-hand column, describe how those roadblocks are there, how the universe should not have put them there in the first place, and how somebody else ought to do something about it. So words, words, words. And I'm going to close my talk now by speaking out of the left-hand column, and I'm going to make a request of you. And a request is a way of asking a question which leaves you free to answer yes or no, but at least with a request, you know you've had the request made of you. So here is my request. Will you consider going on a speaking diet with me? If you are yes to that speaking diet, here's some things you need to know about it. The speaking diet is very similar to diets in some other diets in some regard, and different in others. What is different about the speaking diet is this, that when we go on a diet in order to release weight or to become more healthy, we become, do we not, very aware of what we are putting into our mouths. The speaking diet asks us to be aware of what is coming out of our mouths. Because some of these noises coming out of our mouths, 16,000 of them every day, are going to end up as beliefs in somebody else's mind, maybe. And then they're going to get turned into behavior, and that's going to become change. And we have to be able to ask ourselves, am I a stand for that? And so the speaking diet is about experimenting over the next week, how much time you spend in the left-hand column as opposed to the right-hand column. Whether you produce action in conversation through requests and promises, or whether you can do more of that. But there is one secret tip to the speaking diet which will really accelerate its effectiveness, and it's this. It's about giving something up. Just as if we're really committed to releasing weight, maybe we shouldn't eat pizza every single day, so too with the speaking diet. I would invite you to give up having conversations about how disappointed you are with anybody else's commitments or promises. It would be so easy to listen to the talk like this and go online and leave a comment, right-hand side of the column. Leave a comment about how politicians need to deliver on their promises and how business leaders need to walk their talk. Blah, blah, blah. All that conversation out there, how disappointed we are with others, has no power to change the world. Don't be worried about worried about anybody else's integrity. Worry most of all about embracing your own integrity. Be your word. And in that way, one word at a time, we will change our world. Thank you for listening.